Hey everyone, this is Tom Salemi. Welcome back to the DeviceTalks Weekly Podcast. We're going to be focusing on single-use endoscopes in this episode. It's another white paper for your ears. We've got a few things coming up. I'm going to bring back interviews I did with Boston Scientific and Ambu. We talked with executives from there last year, and really were two great in-depth interviews, and wanted to sort of lay the groundwork again. We've seen some news this year with Olympus Pentax entering the market. We'll certainly follow up with those companies in a future episode, but wanted to, again, bring the insights from Boston Scientific and Ambu. I do have some new data from Ambu, and we have a new perspective from Boston Scientific. I spoke with Sean Hooley, the associate editor of Mass Device, about a recent article he wrote about Boston Scientific's endoscopy program and its med-surg business. So we'll hear from Sean. And then again, we'll hear those interviews a little bit later. We'll also hear from Marie Autumn. Marie is a principal product development engineer at TE Connectivity. They'll be putting on a Device Talks Tuesdays on this very topic coming up Tuesday at 4 p.m. It's called Advancing Technologies for Single-Use Endoscopes. You can do two things to find out more information and register. You can go to devicetalks.com, or we put a QR code on the graphic for this episode of the podcast. So if you see that QR code on LinkedIn, just scan it with your phone, and you can see more about Marie and Bernard McDermott. And you can also register for that program. So here we go. I'm going to bring you this great episode of the Device Talks Weekly Podcast with, yes, Chris Newmarker is back. All right, you ready for this?
Ready.
Chris Newmarker, welcome back.
Good to be here, Tom.
I hope you're well rested. We gave you a lot of time off.
Yeah, actually, no, it was a really great vacation. It was great. It's always nice in Minnesota to head up north for a bit, and then came home, right in time to watch half of my maple tree fall on my neighbor's garage when we finally started getting some stormy weather.
Ouch.
So, we're keeping things fun around here.
And you had a little COVID excitement as well with the daycare.
Yes, yeah. Indeed. But everything is fine with that. Everything's good. So
awesome.
We're very fortunate. There's you just gotta count your blessings during these times.
Well, your good news, Chris, is next week's Labor Day, and we're going to take Labor Day weekend off. So we won't do a podcast next week, so we can all breathe a little easier.
Break the grill out one more time.
That's right.
For the end of the summer. Yeah.
You know what season it is? Pumpkin sausage season, baby.
Oh, you're right. It's going to be coming back. They probably already have pumpkin spice latte at the coffee places again too.
For sure.
Time to get the pumpkin drinks. Yeah.
Just to reiterate for folks who might not recall, Chris and I are vehemently anti-pumpkin sausage.
Yes.
Pumpkin
sausage, pumpkin beer too, right?
Yes, no pumpkin beer.
That.
Yeah.
I'm good. Pumpkin bread is good.
Pumpkin pie is good.
Pumpkin pie is good.
Yeah.
Even some roasted pumpkin seeds,
Delicious. Yeah. Yep. And not too bad for you either. Yeah.
Yeah. Got some, I think they got a lot of potassium in
I think you're right.
There you go. Which you counteract by putting a lot of salt on them.
People are funny. Anyway, it's been a busy week. It's always a busy week.
Has.
This is a super busy week. We've got some breaking news. We'll bring down
news today.
Later in the Newmarker's Newsmakers. We have a new contributor to the Mass Device and Medical Design and Outsourcing pages. We'll mention and have him on the podcast sometime in the future. But let's roll in. Let's just hit number 5 on the old Newmarker's Newsmakers.
Here you go. Let's do it. So, number 5 on the list, we have a really good feature from our associator Sean Hooley, who interviewed Boston Scientific's Dave Pierce about how things are looking really bright in their med-surg segment right now. I mean, the revenue for that segment year over year is 64.6%, which I mean, a lot of that is recovering from COVID. But even if you're like, okay, compare it to 2019, it's up 9%. So, and he was kind of listing off some like these significant products that they're rolling out that, are kind of making this business like a really important part of Boston Scientific's future.
Yeah.
So,
okay. And Sean and I connected with Sean a few hours ago. We're going to have a little bit of a breakdown because specifically about an update on Boston Scientific's single-use scope business. So we'll talk about that.
That's awesome. They've really become a leader in that space.
Absolutely.
It's awesome.
All right, let's move on to number 4.
Number 4, some robotic surgery news out of Johnson & Johnson that, their RS Health subsidiary has signed a supply agreement with Incision. And, Incision has its active electrode monitoring that's designed to prevent dangerous stray electrosurgical burns in a minimally invasive surgery. So looks like Auris is, picking up a little bit of, surgical monitoring technology to, help them out as they, continue to, work on soft tissue surgery systems to, get into the market and, compete with Intuitive.
All right, well, I'm here with Marie Autumn. She, again, is the Principal Product Development Engineer for TE Connectivity. Marie, what will we be talking about on Tuesday at 4 p.m. at the upcoming Device Talks Tuesdays?
So we have a lot of engineers who've spent decades working on ultrasound equipment, so really fine wires that might be smaller than one of your hairs. We have engineers who are experts at reusable surgical devices and catheters. And so we're taking all of that expertise and pulling it together and finding the balance between, high performance and lower cost that's necessary in a single-use space. So I'll be talking about some of the components that we can offer, some of the designs that we've already put together to help advance this space in single-use endoscopy so that you can start offering, safer products, but at a reasonable cost.
Great. And who should be in attendance?
Those who are interested in seeing kind of how we've gone about designing single-use scopes, what types of components and subassemblies that we can offer to help enhance performance in devices out there.
All right, great stuff. Thanks, Marie. Please, folks, if you'd like to attend, you can do 2 things. You can go to DeviceTalks.com as always, or you can scan the QR code on the podcast graphic that you'll see on social media. You'll also find it on the DeviceTalks.com website where we'll have the podcast posted. Just scan on that. You'll have information about Marie and about her co-presenter, Bernard McDermott. And you can also, of course, register to attend. We'd love to have you there on the upcoming Device Talks Tuesdays. I'm here with Sean Hooley, Associate Editor of Mass Device. Sean, as everybody on this podcast knows by now, we're focusing on single-use endoscopes, and we'll be running an interview I did with Dave Pierce and Brian Dunkin just about a year ago, and wanted to update folks on what milestones these companies have reached, what achievements they've had since that interview. And I understand you spoke with Dave Pierce recently. You had an article on Mass Device. Can you give us some highlights from that conversation regarding single-use endoscopes?
Yeah, well, so we spoke right after Boston Scientific released their Q2 earnings, and they were, very high on the med-surg segment, which includes GI endoscopy and urology. And so they were talking, Dave Pierce talked a lot about how their organic growth has continued to rise, and they've been comparing to 2019 instead of 2020 for obvious reasons. Numbers are a little bit different in 2020, but they're really high on the single-use endoscope portion of the med-surg segment, including mainly the EXALT Model B single-use bronchoscope was given CE mark approval in May, and then FDA clearance actually maybe a week or 2 after Dave and I talked last month. So that's coming through, and then they have the Spyglass single-use scopes that they're also very high on, and it's a big part of this unit, as Dave made very clear. He talked about how they originally got into the market with Spyglass and then launched in 2019 the first single-use duodenoscope, EXALT D, and then Spyglass Discover, and now EXALT B. So what he told me was there's a lot going on, and the commercial channel in that space is operating at what he said is a really high level.
That's awesome. Thanks a lot, Sean. Now, let's hear from Dr. Brian Dunkin, the CMO of Boston Scientific's Endoscopy Group, and Dave Pierce. He's Executive Vice President and President of MedSurg and President of Endoscopy. Well, Dr. Brian Dunkin and David Pierce, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thank you, Tom.
Thanks for having us.
So this is an interesting area, single-use endoscopy, and it's an area where you folks made some headlines in December with the approval of Exalt. I wanted to follow up on where you are in this line in the endoscopy business. First of all, how have the first 6 months or so gone with Exalt?
So the great question, and thanks for your interest. So you're right. In December, we were the first company to receive breakthrough approval for single-use duodenoscope. We have done some great clinical work to date. We've now have 3 publications on the technology, 1 benchtop, 2 with a total of 108 patients. So we're doing the right work from a clinical standpoint. We feel like the technology is going to be well received by the customer base. Obviously, in the era of COVID, the adoption has been a little bit slower than we had anticipated. Certainly, late March, April, May, really challenging as hospital administrators were focusing, rightly so, on COVID. We've seen nice acceleration in July, August, and starting in September. So we feel good about it, and we feel like we have a winning technology.
Just so I understand, when did customers actually have the ability to buy and to use Exalt? Was it available in January, or is it just rolled out more recently?
It was really rolled out toward the end of February from a manufacturing capacity standpoint, and then obviously
not the best timing.
The entire cut down in March. But the interest remains very, very high.
Dr. Dunkin, can you speak to the necessity for this kind of technology prior to COVID, and then maybe we can revisit now in the COVID era where concerns about infection are even more heightened?
Yeah, it's a great question, and the necessity really comes out of the difficulty with reprocessing reusable duodenoscopes in this space. I mean, duodenoscopes probably definitely is among the most complex scopes that we use. And as a result, that complexity leads to difficulties in reprocessing. It's a human factors nightmare, well over 130 manual steps for cleaning a scope and getting it ready for the next patient. And as we've seen with the studies that have come out of the FDA, even when that process is done with oversight and using what's thought to be best practice, 1 in 20 endoscopes that are thought to be patient ready have a pathogen of concern on them and are putting the next patient at risk. So that's, as a clinician, and I've done thousands of these procedures in my practice as a therapeutic endoscopist, that's concerning, right? Nobody wants to tell a patient that you got a 1 in 20 chance that the thing I'm going to use for you is contaminated. So huge need. Interesting, it's still a growing kind of understanding in the clinical community about that need. And that's might be more on an international than on a U.S. basis. But definitely this is a technology that meets that need. And one thing that we've learned, not only is the magnitude of the problem, but is kind of the underlying reason for it. I know in the early days of discussion, the focus was on the tip of the scope. A duodenoscope, as many know, has an elevator on its tip, this movable ramp that I can use to change the direction of the instrument that's passed through it. And that's different, right? So we thought, well, it must be something around the elevator. And certainly it's hard as heck to clean around that thing. And so there was a lot of focus on that. But as we started to understand this problem more, this is a biofilm problem. Bacteria make biofilm. It's like a syrup that they envelop themselves in to protect themselves from their environment and increase their kind of virulence. And biofilms form on any wet surface. So any internal wet surface within an endoscope, duodenoscope or otherwise, is susceptible to a biofilm. So that means if you're going to focus on a replaceable tip or a condom on the tip or something like that, that's a partial solution, which is why we at Boston Scientific wanted a comprehensive solution and leverage our experience in single-use endoscopes, that we've built up over many years to make a single-use device that absolutely eliminates the possibility of endoscope-acquired infection coming from reprocessing.
Well, hearing that's a really good sales pitch to me as a patient. sounds like why would there be any resistance at all? Maybe I'm mischaracterizing it as resistance, but David, in selling this, what has talk a bit about the force you've assembled to engage customers, and what is sort of the dialogue around that? What would prevent someone from seeing this as an improvement?
Yeah, so I mean, Boston Scientific Endoscopy has been the category leader in the GI endoscopy space for many years. We've been in this business for 40 years, and we've been pioneers in so many different technologies, from single-use biopsy forceps, devices to create hemostasis, multiple stents for the different anatomies throughout the GI tract. In 2007, we launched our first scope, the Spyglass. We're on our fourth generation of that technology right now, and it definitively changes the way a clinician can diagnose and therefore treat patients with pancreaticobiliary disease. So we've taken that 40 years of experience and intimacy with the GI community and built what we feel is a fantastic scope, single use, eliminates the infection risk, as Dr. Dunkin alluded to, and we're putting it through what we think is the best GI sales channel in the industry, and combining their efforts with our world-class device portfolio, now augmenting it with a single-use scope portfolio, and really bringing the full force to bear. When we go into a hospital, there's a lot of constituencies that are going to be involved in making this decision, right? Obviously, you want to have clinical support. You want to have the support of the infection prevention team. And then in some cases, C-suite folks get involved because it's a different economic situation than the reusable scopes. We feel like we're doing the right work, answering all the questions for those constituencies. We've applied for and received the TPT for Medicare outpatient. We're working on getting a new technology add-on payment for the Medicare inpatient. So we're doing the right work to ensure that any economic concerns are addressed. And in the long term, we're going to have a technology that's safer for patients, puts the staff of the hospital at a lower risk, increases efficiency, and not have an economic challenge to it.
And we've discussed prior to my pushing record that I've talked to Ambu, which has a product in the field as well. There's a difference in price between yours and theirs. Theirs is cheaper. How do you see that sort of playing into Boston Scientific story? Is that something you need to overcome? Is that difficult to overcome? What's the situation on price?
Yeah, so for us, we feel like we're pricing our scope appropriately. We think the value that our scope delivers clinically, from an efficiency standpoint, from a safety of your staff standpoint, and obviously eliminating the risk of infection, that full package of value, we feel like we're priced appropriately, and ultimately we'll work through Medicare to get all of those patients covered, and we'll work with private payers following that to get private payer coverage as well.
And Tom, if I just can add one thing on that. I mean,
please do.
This is a nuanced procedure, doing ERCP with a duodenoscope. Dave talks about Boston Scientific, and we've been in this space for a long time, making the devices that go through that scope. So we have a pretty deep understanding of what it takes to do the procedure successfully. And making a scope that can do that is significant. As an endoscopist, we get a little bit superstitious, almost like your favorite baseball bat or tennis racket or something, right? Like you get used to what you have in your hand and the success that you have with it, and meeting those requirements with a single-use platform is not an easy thing to do. And so I think that having a device that looks, feels, and functions like a reusable device doesn't change the procedure for me as the clinician, and gives me the same success rate at performing the procedure. That's no small task, and I think that that's also part of that formula on value.
That's a great point, and it's in line with the question I want to ask on the clinician front. We can talk about dollars, and administrators have their own priorities, but clinicians, are they? Yeah, I think you hit upon this a little bit earlier on, but is this a technology, an idea they're willing to embrace, or do they again, I guess maybe is there more heft to a reusable device that they're comfortable with? Is there something that they're clinging to?
Yeah, I don't know if I'd characterize it as clinging. I would say if you've never seen the scope, the idea is, you meet it with skepticism. A reusable scope is, it costs more than most people's car, right? That's an expensive device that's sophisticated. You look at this thing like, this is a sophisticated piece of equipment. How could you possibly make this to a single-use platform? But then when they get it in their hands, and even more when they use it for a procedure, that part is impressive to me. In fact, one of the things that I take as a great sign of success is that when I'm watching clinicians do procedures with this scope, whether that's part of a live broadcast or if I'm in the room with them alone, there's discussion about the scope in the beginning. Oh, it's a little lighter. The wheels feel like this. The shaft feels like that, which are kind of the usual discussions you have when you change to a different manufacturer. If I use the reusable X and then I go to a reusable Y, it's going to feel a little bit different. And that's what people equate it to. But then once the scope's in position and they're doing the procedure, we're not talking about the scope anymore. We're talking about the procedure, the cannulation, the disease that the patient has, and that kind of thing. That's exactly what we were trying to accomplish in developing it. So there is this skepticism until they get it in their hands and use it, and then I think that skepticism goes quickly away.
And Brian, I mentioned earlier the clinical publications, the two that have 108 patients, and maybe speak to the kind of how the ASG classifies ERCP and that the scope's been successfully used in even the most difficult cases.
Yeah, it's a great point, Dave. ASG, which is really the dominant U.S. society around therapeutic endoscopy and really the voice of ERCP in the healthcare community. One of the things they do that they delivered to us is a measurement tool for kind of the difficulties of ERCP. Like, okay, if you want to do comparative studies, how difficult is this case versus that? So they classify ERCP in 4 different categories, 1 being the easiest, 4 being the hardest, and it has to do with anatomy, disease, those kinds of things. And Exalt, in the studies that we have used it in to look at its performance, been used in everything, 1 through 4. We didn't want to cherry pick cases, take the 1s and 2s, not do the 3s and 4s. In fact, I was talking to one of our investigators. His first case was a 4. It's just, he's like, I wouldn't have chosen that if I was making a decision, but that's the way the trial was designed, and that's the way we went, and it went successfully. So again, it does speak to the performance demands on this scope in general, and then being able to recreate that in a single-use platform.
That's helpful. I know you have a few more minutes, so just 2 quick questions. What is the vision for single-use scopes going forward? Is this 5 years from now? Are 95% of these going to be just the single-use? Is it going to be 50-50? How does this play out in Boston Scientific's plans?
Yeah, so I'll take that, and then Brian, if you want to grow with that a little bit. So prior to coming back to endoscopy recently, I spent the last 4 years in our urology business, and four-ish, almost 5 years ago, we launched our first single-use ureteroscope, and the adoption was slow but steady. But over time, what we started to see was the utilization went up and up and up and up because of the fact that you could confidently know that there would be no infection associated with the scope. You knew you could test and work that scope as hard as possible, because even if there was some performance deminimization, you weren't going to have to use that on the next patient. So you could take on the hardest and most difficult cases and do those. The efficiency, the scope was always available. You didn't have to rely on the hospital cleaning staff to get your product back to you. So all of those factors led to a much broader adoption than we had anticipated at first. And I can see several of those factors coming into play with Exalt going forward.
Yeah, Tom, I might just add to that from a clinical standpoint. It is one of the questions we get frequently is, well, which patients should I use it on? And I think in the beginning, many are going to segment patients, and they're going to segment them according to risk, like we do in a lot of things in healthcare, right? We have to make kind of risk-benefit decisions with our patients. And so, we've talked about patients that have something compromised in their immune system, a transplant patient or an immunosuppressed patient, cancer patient, those kinds of things, where if they were to get an endoscope-acquired infection, they're not going to tolerate that well. That's a patient to consider on. The other is if a patient's coming to my endo unit and they already have an active infection, that infection could contaminate my existing inventory of reusable scopes. So I got to think about that as well. And so those are two big areas that we talk about. I will say I've had discussions with clinicians all the way from the big academic centers out to more small, medium and small communities. And some of the ones I've talked to said, look, I do a couple hundred of these procedures a year. I don't do a couple of thousand. I have one or two scopes, and it is becoming untenable for me to reprocess the scope the way it has to be reprocessed according to the new guidelines and that. And by the way, the thing's starting to run out, and now I have to on its life, and now I have to make a decision about a new capital equipment. They're planning to go with a single-use scope. It can meet their needs, and they don't have to worry about maintaining this scope, this reusable scope inventory. So I think you're going to see, at the very least, the patient segmentation, and then a build from there, depending on kind of my local regional issues and also the patient populations that I'm serving.
That's excellent. And final quick question. I know you need to go. Brian, you spoke earlier about the impact that COVID had in March and April and May. The impact is long lasting. Salespeople are having a difficult time getting in hospitals. How has this impacted your selling of Exalt and moving into the area? Are you being hindered by an ability to get people connected with physicians? If so, how are you overcoming that?
So I think I'll take a quick shot at that, Brian, and then you can add any points. I think one of the huge advantages that we have is the long-term relationships that we have with really every hospital that does ERCP in the country and many around the world. So we have access as we're supporting cases. We'll get called in to support a difficult case. We'll get called in for any number of reasons. So access is definitely not where it was pre-pandemic, but I think we certainly have an advantage just based upon our long-term relationships. And we've also very effectively pivoted to some virtual tools to engage our physician customers, their staff. So we're teaching, educating, and servicing virtually. And we're also able to reach out through the other constituents in the hospital in virtual ways as well.
Anything to add? Final word, Dr. Duncan?
No, I mean, we're doing e-preceptorships now to extend that reach, so clinicians that want to see this scope in action can get that experience. And then the only other thing I would say in this COVID era is one of the things that I found interesting from a number of the clinicians we talked to is that they're looking at the use of this technology to minimize exposure of staff to COVID because it's one and done. When you're done with the procedure, there's no transport, reprocessing, and exposing really highly trained staff, whether that's the nurse and tech in the room or the reprocessing tech, to having to reprocess a scope on a COVID patient. So we've had clinicians come to us with that concern in mind as well. And I think the COVID experience is going to have people in a heightened sensitivity about managing infectious issues forever, basically, not just when the pandemic goes away, God willing.
Great point. Well, thank you both for your time and your insights and for joining us on the podcast.
Yeah, thank you, Tom. Enjoyed it.
Great. Thanks, Tom.
All right, Chris Newmarker, what's number 3 on the Newmarker's Newsmakers list?
Well, number 3 was just like we just had a ton of news related to Medtronic this week as they released their first quarter results. Medtronic has a fiscal year that's kind of different from a lot of large medtech companies, which usually go by the calendar year. So they finished up their first quarter. They beat the street, sales up 23%. Year over year, and we had our senior editor Danielle Kirsch covering the earnings news, and then we have our new managing editor of medical design outsourcing, Jim Hammerant, who is a veteran journalist, manager of the Business Journal in Seattle for a few years. I actually worked with Jim, about a decade ago at the Minneapolis St. Paul Business Journal. But
you have worked with everybody at one point or another.
It's the nature of I guess that's the nature of journalism. Like, and plus I've always been good at networking with my fellow journalists, around, I guess. So.
It's a good skill, boys and girls. Make sure you build them, build those bridges, don't burn them. Because
I'm a former president of the Society of Professional Journalists chapter here in Minnesota. So.
Really?
Yes.
Well,
promoting the ethics, promoting the profession. It's important, man.
All right,
Mr.
But
anyway,
President.
Jim's a great yeah, Mr. President. Don't play hail to the chief, but but yeah, Jim's like an awesome addition to our team. We're looking forward to everything we're going to be doing with him. But he had a good rundown of what Medtronic CEO Jeff Martha was saying during the earnings call, especially they're going to be boosting their R&D spending at Medtronic this year by like 10%, which Martha was saying was going to be like the largest dollar increase they've ever seen, with year over year with R&D spending. And they're on track with like the two, big things they think are really going to boost them in the future, which is, their, Hugo robotic assisted surgery system, which they want to use to compete against Intuitive, and then the comeback of renal denervation to treat hypertension, which if this pans out could be a very cool technology. Like if you really help out a lot to get in and do some nerve zapping to control hypertension versus having to take more drugs, that'd be pretty cool.
For those who want to hear directly from Jeff Martha, he'll be the guest on our upcoming Medtronic Talks podcast, which will come out on Wednesday. So making sure you subscribe to Medtronic Talks on Apple, Amazon, Spotify, Google, etc., etc.
And just to keep the news rolling out from Medtronic, they FDA also approved their next gen Evolut FX TAVR system, and then I had a story out just a few days ago with a top R&D person at the company, Leonardo Rappoliti, was kind of going over some of the things they learned from the creation of the Micra, like some good advice for other people in the industry, who are trying to shrink implantable devices. I'd recommend taking a look at that article in MDO. It's the headlines, How Medtronic Fit a Battery into a Tiny Pacemaker. So there's some cool stuff there. Still think it's fascinating. They took the battery and basically made it the case of the pacemaker. The can became the battery, which is just fascinating. And then you can just fit the little thing inside the heart instead of running wires. So
yeah, that was quite a big leap when that came out too, in I think 2014, 2015.
Yeah, it was a big leap, and and one of the other really interesting things, was that a lot of times when we write about medical device companies doing a huge innovation, it's it's because they found a startup or a young company and they acquired it in. And Medtronic, this was like an in-house deal. They pulled in people from across the company and did this themselves, which is it's got to give a company a tip of a hat, a large company like that, when they do something like that.
Absolutely. All right, let us move on to number 2 on the New Markets Newsmakers list, Chris.
Well, number 2 on the list, we had Abbott responding to there was a big New York Times expose out, a few days ago, in which they were talking about, Abbott destroying a lot of COVID-19 test inventory. And, we've kind of talked about it before on the podcast.
Yeah, we have.
They, earlier this year, Abbott, reduced their earnings projections a bit, because back when they did that, it looked like we were actually getting COVID under control in this country. So, they thought their test revenue was going to, be down. They started laying off people out of plant in Maine because, they thought there was going to be less demand for tests. And then, Delta happened, and here we are. And the New York Times was kind of pointing out you threw, that Abbott threw away, a lot of inventory,
right? Components of tests, right?
Components of tests,
I
right?
think that was a sticking point, that they weren't completed tests, but they were elements of things that could have been tests.
Exactly. Abbott's CEO, Robert Ford, was telling the New York Times, "Hey, these were the cards, not the entire kits, but." Still it was, some stuff for Abbott to talk about. It looks like they're ramping back up again to try to, respond to the, demand that we're unfortunately going through here in the U.S. and around the world, for that matter.
And it's only going to go up when schools come back in session and we're dealing with regular testing again. So, I remember we talked about that, I don't know, probably wasn't more than a month ago, maybe a month and a half. And we were both understanding as to why they closed the plant up in Westbrook, Maine. It was a different time than it is now, that's for sure.
Yeah, it kind of like, hopefully I'm doing it justice, but Abbott's response was that, this was kind of like, they're just doing standard inventory, but, definitely New York Times raising some questions, Abbott responding to it, it's kind of where it is.
I did reach out to an Abbott spokesperson and invited them on the podcast, have not heard back, but if they get back to us, we'll make sure we present that interview to you. So, all right, good. Chris, I know we have a big number one. We need to get some exclusive sound, don't we? Some mass device exclusive. Is this an exclusive?
Yeah, number one on the list. The story is being finished up as we speak. It should be live on Medical Design and Outsourcing and a mass device by the time we run this podcast. But Jim Hammerhand's finishing up an article. He noticed, we were talking about Abbott like kind of scaling back, and now they're kind of like trying to get these tests going. Well, I mean, guess who is hiring to get more people who are experts in medical diagnostics?
Not Theranos.
They're still around.
We'll be tracking the Theranos trial in future podcasts. We've got
jury selections at the end of the month.
That's right.
Off they go.
But put my snark aside. What company, Chris? Tell us.
Amazon.
There you go. Yeah.
They're hiring. Amazon's hiring. They're looking for a medical regulatory officer in Seattle. They're looking for somebody like a global commodity manager who has experience with medical device or diagnostics experience, relationships with suppliers. The job ad was saying to create long-term business and supplier roadmaps. So, I mean, Amazon, they started selling their own at-home COVID-19 test in July. But it's very intriguing that they're looking to get some big hires in the diagnostic space, to kind of give them more of like a global reach in the space. So it's very interesting. They could be getting ready to make a major diagnostics play.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Great piece of journalism by our new guy Jim Hammerhand. So
and he's got calls out with Amazon and Abbott. But just seeing those job posts, that's definitely some news.
All right, now's the time I bring in Juan Jose Gonzalez. He's the CEO of Ambu, and Stephen Block. He's the president of Ambu US. Once again, we talked with them back in last September, and wanted to just get an update on some activity they've had over the past 12 months. So I reached out to a spokesperson for Ambu, and he provided some numbers that I just wanted to share. According to Ambu, the 21 market for single-use endoscopes is $500 million, and it's expected to grow to $2.5 billion by 2025, which is astounding. That's according to industry estimates. This again comes from Ambu. Ambu this year sold a record number of 1.1 million endoscope units, the year to date, actually, exceeding total volume sold for the entire year of 2019-2020. So they're accelerating sales. They're building a new construction of a high-scale, low-cost manufacturing plant in Mexico. It's going to be Ambu's largest single-use visualization plant. And the company expects the plant to be operational in 2021, 2022, a year sooner than originally planned. They're on target to introduce 20 new products by 2022 and 2023. And they're moving forward with they're trying to enter the GI market. They have a single-use gastroscope system called A-Scope, Gastro, and A-Box. Both have been submitted to the FDA for clearance. And colonoscope is also in process. And finally, total employees year-to-date rose 28%. It's now at 4,388. So that gives us an update. Now it's time to replay my interview with Juan Jose Gonzalez, the CEO of Ambu, and Stephen Block, the president of Ambu US. All right, well, Juan Jose Gonzalez and Stephen Block, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you, Tom.
And thank you very much for inviting us.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Ambu is one of the fastest growing med techs out there. So it's an interesting time to be growing a business like this. Obviously, the pandemic is creating new challenges and new opportunities. So I'd love to find out how you're taking advantage of both. I want to first just hit a little bit upon the history of the company. The Ambu is the name of the company. It's also the name of one of your principal products, the Ambu bag. Which came first? Was it the chicken or the egg? What's the story there?
I think it was first the Ambu bag. And Ambu was founded 85 years ago.
Wow.
And today is considered one of the Danish champions in medical devices. And over the last 80 years, we have transformed the company more than once. And now we are in the middle of a transformation to create this single-use endoscopy market that we think is going to be one of the biggest new markets to come up in medtech.
And Steve, the Ambu bag, can you just, for those who don't know about it, I'm told everyone does, but just tell us a little bit about it.
Well, it's a resuscitator. It has very strong brand recognition. You see it on any medical show out there. It's in high demand. It's the market leader for resuscitators. Regarding the startup in the U.S., we started in the 80s, mm-hmm. So maybe 50 years later than when Ambu started in Denmark. And we were predominantly an EMS company, and that's where the bag came into play. I started in 2013. We were small distributed business, basically, with a small sales force. We were doing about $60 million in revenue, and fast forward 7 years later, we've quadrupled revenue. We have over 500 employees. We are a leader in anesthesia and pioneered single-use endoscopy. So the infrastructure is quite large now, and we're focused on bronchoscopy, ENT, cysto, and soon to be GI.
Excellent. Well, give me a sense of the shape of the company in a global sense. How much of it is outside the U.S., how much of it is inside the U.S., and where else are you in other parts of the world?
Sure. So, we are a global company today, and the US is the most important market. What Steve and his team have done over the last few years has been remarkable, and the US accounts for half of our sales globally. And then we are very strong in Western Europe, and we have some presence in Asia, especially in Australia, Japan, and China. So that's more or less the mix. And in terms of portfolio, it's about 30% anesthesia, 30% patient monitoring, and then 40% single-use endoscopy. And that division is growing, very, very rapidly. You're talking about 40% plus, which basically means that it doubles, every 2 to 3 years. And that's the main engine of our company,
Let me get the COVID question out of the way. But it's you are a global company. You touch many countries. How has your experience been in different markets?
Let me talk a little bit about globally, and then Steven can talk about the US. First of all, our products are used in the treatment of COVID-19 patients. So actually, in this pandemic, Ambu played a very important role. Both our Ambu bag, the product upon which this company was founded, and our single-use bronchoscopy were at the forefront in terms of the treatment of COVID-19 patients. And then the impact has varied by market significantly, depending on how strong was the pandemic, the type of healthcare system, where it was a government-driven or where it was major healthcare systems. Which basically means that we had significant volatility. So if I look at Europe in the last quarter, it tripled in sales. And it was mainly driven by the key Western European markets. And the US is growing over 20% year to date. So, it has been quite a test for us. We have had to rapidly expand manufacturing capacity and air freight our products to make sure that we fulfill our role as a healthcare company.
Yeah, no, because I'm curious, because it seems as if with the single-use endoscopy tool and the Ambu bags, you are positioned for there's a lot of opportunity there in a difficult time like this.
Yeah, with COVID, it's heightened awareness now with contamination and the risk of infection. So we're in excellent shape. We have a diversified portfolio, so from March to June with elective surgeries non-existent, some of our anesthesia products were put on hold, but resuscitators and the endoscopy products and any single-use scope product showed a huge increase, probably double increase in Q2. We've also managed to launch 3 new products during COVID with our monitors and 2 new scopes. And the training on virtual training and the engagement of our customers and our salespeople probably was more efficient and more effective than ever before. And I think we're just going to be a much stronger company, at least in the U.S. After this.
Well, let's focus on your news in the U.S. This summer, you got an approval from the FDA for your single-use endoscope, but this was not your first device. Give us a little bit of history of the single-use endoscope portfolio that you have, because it dates back prior to this summer.
So in 2013, or 2014 or so, we launched the first bronchoscope, the aScope 3. And then 2015, there was a CRE crisis with ERCP products. It did catch national attention. I'm sure you've heard of it as far as the infections regarding the ERCP products. So it's been quite of a boom. So we've launched the bronchoscope, the ENT product, and the cystoscope. And we just got approval, as you mentioned, for our single-use ERCP product. The interest level for the GI space is greater than any product we ever launched, especially with the undocumented infections. So there's a strong interest for a single-use option. As you mentioned, we're also excited that we received FDA clearance with breakthrough designation. Reimbursement's available, so I think it's going to get moving along pretty quickly. And we have a price advantage compared to our other single-use competitor. We're about half the price. And we're incredibly excited because it's a multi-billion-dollar market that is much larger than the markets that we've been playing in as of late.
And the competitor is Boston Scientific. I'll say it since you won't say it. But, well, let's focus on reimbursement. Were you impacted this week? CMS issued a reimbursement for innovative breakthrough products, I think related to specifically a pandemic, and that's an area I'm currently exploring myself so I can understand. Were you impacted by that at all? Or did you already have the reimbursement you needed prior to this week's news from CMS, or the executive order, I should say, that led to the news from CMS?
Well, the reimbursement that was given for single-use ERCP was offset reimbursement. So it's only used for outpatients, which are about 30 to 40% of the patients. So really the price at the pump is what's driving this sale. Our product is at least half the price of the competitors. And there is reimbursement for a small majority of the patients, but overall, it's really the cost of the product that's going to dictate the overall cost.
And is there any need for you to have salespeople in the room when it's used? I would imagine not, to assist with this. It's just sort of get it in the shelves kind of thing.
I would say ideally it's best to have the salesperson in the room. We hired about 160 or so GI professionals. As far as I'm concerned, we probably have the best GI sales force on the market, in the market, excuse me. We have you name it, every top GI company, they're here. They wanted to launch this product. They wanted to make history. They have contacts with all the key gastroenterologists around the country. If they can't get into cases, which obviously we can't get into many cases nowadays, they are doing virtual meetings. They're meeting in parking lots. They're meeting in coffee shops. There's great interest in this product. And we have hundreds and hundreds of demos and presentations in a short time span of maybe a month or two.
Interesting. And those meeting in the parking lots, those are in coffee shops are with surgeons or hospital executives or whomever? All the above?
All the above. All the above. Physicians, healthcare providers, administration, executives. It's amazing what's going out there.
Juan Jose, how does this look on a global sense? What are other markets doing? Is price as much of a driver there as it is here? And are you running into the same hurdles as to getting an opportunity for salespeople to interact with potential customers or customers?
Endoscopy, as you know, is one of the largest medical device markets, and it's a very established market. And and it's a reusable endoscopy model. And basically what we are doing globally is driving the creation of a single-use market, which is a combination of a product that is 100% sterile, so there is no risk of contamination, that have very strong economics, very advanced technology, and it gives hospitals a lot of convenience and flexibility. So when you look at that value proposition, it actually travels around the world quite well. What we have created in the US, we have done something similar in the United Kingdom, and Spain, and Italy, and Germany, and Australia. Of course, outside of the US, pricing is even more important, and that gives us a stronger position. And depending where you are, there are some additional differences in terms of whether it is a hospital base or in clinic, and you have different levels of access. But for the most part, healthcare systems are trying to restart electives. They look at single-use endoscopy as a solution to be able to do it without any concerns around infection. No?
So is just looking broadly ahead to where we're headed with single-use endoscopy, is your vision and the vision of anyone else selling products in this market, parentheses Boston Scientific, to have all endoscopes be disposable, or do you see this as a subset of the endoscope market, and there'll still be some that need to be disinfected and sterilized, but there'll also be single-use used side by side? What does the future look like in your mind?
As far as my mind, I seriously see over the next 5 to 10 years, reusables. Maybe they won't be gone totally, but single-use will have the majority of the market share. There's just no reason to use a reusable product. Single use is, the image is better, the functionality, the availability, the cost. It's not about if you're going to do it or convert, it's about when you're going to convert. And, most hospitals, right now, the top 500 hospitals in the US, we've converted 96% of them as far as volume of bronchoscopies. There is no reason not to do it, and the hospitals that aren't doing it are really pointing their fingers to the hospitals next door saying they have the problem, we don't have the problem. And quite honestly, once there's a seminal event, they call us and they convert immediately. So sometimes it takes a couple of weeks, and sometimes it might take a couple of years, but sooner or later they will go single use.
Is conversion, do you consider it if you just get in the door, or is it all the endoscopes are all single use that are used?
There are a lot of different types of scopes. We have bronchoscopy, we have cysto, we have ENT, we have duodenoscope. So we have different salespeople for different scopes. And conversion, I guess the first step to conversion is to have them accept the idea of why they need to go single use. Sometimes it could be a couple of champions within the hospital that start off the conversion, and then it leads to a full conversion. There are some hospitals, very large institutions out there that just totally convert. It's all based on what has happened in the past, administration, possible legalities, workflow, expenses. There's an array of reasons why, and at the end of the day, it has to have a good health economic story, which we do have.
Sure. And Juan Jose, how about outside the U.S.?
What I was thinking is just reflecting on your question. Today's single-use endoscopy is about 1% to 2% of the total endoscopy market. So if you ask me, over the next few years, are we going to coexist? Definitely. In most hospitals, there will be reusable and there will be single use. But if you were to start doing endoscopy today with the technology available today, you will never create a reusable model. You will never say, let's buy a $200,000 tower with a $50,000 reusable scope. Let's use chemicals to reprocess it. And by the way, at the end, it might not be fully sterile and it might break, and then you will have to buy another one. it's a business model that you will never do it now. So if you ask me going forward, what do I think? Technology is moving so fast, and I'm talking about technology that powers single use, sensors, image enhancement software, artificial intelligence, monitors, lighting, material science. Every year, all the trends to move to single use become stronger, more focus on infection control, more awareness of the benefits in terms of economics, more need for convenience and flexibility, regulators, reimbursement. And then on top of that, you put technology. And I fully agree with Stephen. In 10 years, you should see a significant shift towards single use now.
Yeah, Tom, just to add a little bit to that, and cross-contamination is a huge issue. Infections are a huge issue. COVID has heightened awareness. But I'm sure you follow ECRI annually, and scope contamination is in the top 10 in issues that hospitals face on a yearly basis. And reprocessing a scope, there's 100 steps to reprocess a scope, and human error is inevitable. It's going to happen. The studies out there show upwards of 50% that reusable scopes are contaminated. I have just countless stories, and there's many studies. I mean, there's one study that said 57% are contaminated. So it's, again, it's not if, it's when.
Great. This podcast allows me to ask stupid questions. So my stupid question, maybe everyone else who's listening knows, is what changed? Why are you able to create these scopes now that can be disposed of as opposed before? Is it just new materials, just cheaper manufacturing? Again, all of the above. What's new in this technology?
I would say two things happen. Number one, technology reached a point where now you can have a single-use endoscopy with an image resolution required to be able to have a good procedure and a good diagnostic. And if you remember your iPhone 5 generations ago versus your iPhone today, the quality of the image. So that sensor, those sensor upgrades, that's actually what is also driving our own innovation. And then on the other side, you have an environment that now is more focused on understanding what is the true contamination level, the importance of infection control, how much it really costs to have all that reusable endoscopy infrastructure, and how does it compare against single use. And I will say those things is what actually allow Ambu to start innovating, to create a market, and now moving into an acceleration phase now.
And final question, I know you need to go. Regarding the agreement with Premier, it's a 3-year agreement. Tell us a little bit about that, Stephen or Juan Jose, and what does that mean? It sounds as if it gives you some degree of exclusivity in the area, or does it?
It does. So we have a fantastic corporate account team and great relations with all the GPOs and IDNs. We've been working with Premier very closely. They've developed and created a single use endoscopy agreement. It's a nationwide agreement, but for sole source, it's more for Premier. It's more for Surpass and for Ascend, which are affiliates of Premier. So the Premier agreement is a nationwide multi-source. But regarding Ascend and Surpass, we have a sole source for bronchoscope. But all scopes are on the agreement.
And that will essentially give you access. The membership of Premier represents 4,100 hospitals and health systems, 200,000 other providers. So, I mean, what does this do for your market penetration in the U.S.?
Well, it definitely helps. I mean, it definitely helps in Surpass and Ascend, where we have a sole source, and Premier will work with us to convert those hospitals. Regarding GPOs in general, it just gives you a ticket to get to the dance. There are no obstacles, so it gives us free passage to work with Premier and start converting their hospitals across the board. But regarding Surpass and Ascend, it will definitely give us incremental revenue for sure.
All right, well, that's great news about Premier. Juan Jose, we'll give you the opportunity to wrap this up. I mean, Ambu is a great story. European company growing into a global device company. What does that say for Ambu's story, but also more broadly about opportunities in Europe?
Well, I mean, the aspiration for Ambu is to be the world's most innovative single-use endoscopy player. And I would say that is quite unique. First, because we are based in Europe, and it has been sometimes if you have a European medtech champion, one that is able to disrupt an established market and create an entirely new one. And that's what we are trying to do. And we invest aggressively in innovation. We believe that we come from the future. We are taking all the new technologies coming up to be able to advance patient care in a way that have not been done before. And we are very excited with the possibilities.
Excellent. Well, it's a great story. I'm grateful that you chose to share it with us. And thank you so much for joining us on the podcast.
Thank you very much, Tom.
All right, Chris Newmarker. Now is the time to plead for social media love. Where can folks find you on those social media channels?
You can find me on LinkedIn, Chris Newmarker, just like a Newmarker, and I'm on Twitter @Newmarker. So always happy to connect.
Absolutely. And I'm on the Twitter as well @MedTechTom. I'm on LinkedIn, Tom, SALEMI. And please do connect with Chris and myself when you share this podcast episode on your social media channels. And you will share this podcast episode on your social media channels. We insist, and we'd love to be a part of that conversation. Also, please.
You gotta follow, subscribe.
There you go.
You gotta be there or be square.
That's right. You're either part of the solution or you're part of the problem, right, Chris? You're either with us or you're not with us, I guess. But anyway.
Wow, you're channeling the W years. I feel like I'm in my 30s again, Tom.
I'm happy to bring you back to those healthy on days. So please do subscribe to this podcast. As I mentioned earlier, we're available on every major podcast channel. So if you subscribe, you get these episodes sent directly to you as soon as I push publish. And you don't have to wait for us to post it on social media or get it up on any website. It'll be sent right to your listening device. It's super convenient, super duper convenient. So just subscribe. And that's it. Please tune in next week. We'll have another great episode of the DeviceTalks Weekly Podcast waiting for you.
Hey, take care. Enjoy the end of the summer.
And get vaccinated, for crying out loud.
Yeah. Well, most medtech people know to get vaccinated, right? I mean, they got to be getting vaccinated, but pester your relatives.